I'll be painting a white Persian cat, and even though this was not the purpose, I did use almost all my violets and purples that I have in my watercolor collection. And the painting was difficult. I had no idea if I'm on the right track half the time, and I changed the strategy about twice. But now I think I would be able to simplify this type of painting to be done more quickly and quite easily. And so I'd love to share my process with you. And also the entire painting process is available as a real-time paint with me video on my Patreon. You can download my sketch from there and literally paint along step by step the entire thing that took nearly about 2 or 3 hours. I'm going to use my broad hake brush for dampening my paper, since there's going to be quite a lot of wet in wet, and then paint mostly with my silver black velvet brushes. You can find links to the used materials in the description of this video. I also made this illustration originally for a book. It's the project that I'm still working on, but I will talk about that project in a separate video. And here is the color selection, which is always something that I spend so much time on. I'm trying to figure out which colors to use, and I have to admit, once I pick a color scheme, I feel such strong excitement to start painting. It's very different from when I have a stable palette with paints and then I open it and go, because this process involves pressing the paints from the tubes to a separate palette or a plate, and so there is no color around that would disturb me or tempt me to use it if I didn't plan for it. But yeah, the downside is that I have so many palettes here with leftover paint, different color schemes that no longer fit me, and I have no clean palettes when I need them. A complete list of all the paints that I used can be found on the Patreon page, where I was able to be slightly more detailed. But if I was to give you an overview, most of the purples that I used were Granulating Purples by Daniel Smith, Moon Glow, Shadow Violet, Lunar Violet, and so on. And then I used smooth and really dark colors such as Neutral Tint, Carbazole Violet, or Payne's Gray. To warm up the midtones, I used Buff Titanium and Potter's Pink. And this entire color scheme, I think it worked very well for this particular painting. If it confuses you what granulation or smoothness of the paint does and what it means, or how to make sure that you're buying either smooth or granulating paints, I can reference that in a separate video, so let me know. But just a quick overview is that granulation helps me to give painting a more textured and grainy look, and this is particularly helpful for painting fur, which is why I wanted to use a lot of it here. I started painting into the wet surface, and my first goal was to roughly establish mid-tone areas. The fur of the cat is white and the light is hitting it from the right side, and so that's where the highlights are going to be, and I have to avoid that area with my brush so that I can preserve the white of the paper. More of those shadows are concentrating on the left, so that's where I'm trying to place in more paint. Then a few of my favorite splatters, even wet in wet, they work nicely and help me create playful watercolor textures. When I think all my paint is in the right place, I check all the areas that I want to stay light if I need to remove some of the pigment. Sometimes they get obstructed with color, and then I can use clean water to push the pigment outwards. For example, on the face, there are also some parts of the fur that are whiter than the others, and so those are the areas that I'm trying to protect as well. First layer is now dry, and I will continue wet on dry from now on, more or less. Here I was trying to deepen the mid-tones using more transparent violets. I need to work on dry surface now, because where I'm painting around that fur color, I need the individual furry details to look sharp and clearly defined. You can't achieve sharp edges when working inside a wet area, but that technique always comes in handy in places where I would want to blur out stuff that are not that important. So mostly in the background, or if you want to make something look loose and a part of the atmosphere. Here I thought there is nothing to gain by building my layers up too slowly and jumped to a pretty dark shade of gray. I knew this area will be a part of the blurry background, and so this didn't hurt the painting, rather helped me to establish the contrast right away. And here is a tip on how you can feather out a harder edge rather easily with a spray bottle. I find it being more gentle to my painting than if I was to do it with a brush. It's less smudging and the gradient is just seamless. As for this corner, I thought foolishly that I would be able to do the entire silhouette on this side and the whiskers with negative painting technique. But as soon as I started, I realized this will end up a mess. The whiskers and the fur is too thin and delicate, and it will be easier and cleaner to use masking fluid. If I can avoid masking fluid, I will. Why? Because it is such a long process, a fun one I have to admit, but I really just have a fraction of time to complete a painting. This prolongs the process so much. But time is not a factor if the quality of the painting is concerned, and so I simply dried everything, then pulled out the masking fluid and simply masked all the areas that I wanted to preserve. When you're working with masking fluid, you better hide your brushes and even lock them somewhere until you're done. These things ruin your nice art supplies if you're not too careful. Never clean this with water, just let it dry on the brush or a designated applicator, and then I just scrape it off or cut it off with scissors. By the way, I bought about 6 types of masking fluid to test out on this channel, and so if that sounds like something fun to watch, make sure to subscribe. Thanks to this, I was able to continue painting the background quite efficiently after the masking fluid has dried. I tried to go really dark this time, and my mixtures were mostly neutral tint, carbazole violet and Payne's grey. After I laid down all my darkest darks, I painted a lighter base color for the eyes, nose and the mouth. Those are central face features that I was still avoiding until now, because if the textures and the fur didn't work out as I planned, then I probably would have to start over again, and therefore didn't want to waste time doing sharp details that are not such high risk. Sometimes the paint doesn't dry out as dark as I think it should be. In fact, watercolor always dries much lighter, and you can solve this by adding another layer of paint until you're happy with the result. I realized that as I'm describing my process in my videos and talking about all the technical stuff, I might come off as there is nothing else going on in my head when I paint, just business, placing the paint, correcting, executing the job. But it's not at all like that. I just get to think about that a lot when I edit these videos. Without that reliving the painting process one more time, I would probably never be able to spot certain problems and address them. But also, and more importantly, there is poetry in painting with watercolor, and it has a way of letting me channel my energy and calm my inner chaos, and it just is there for me and lets me observe it. And this is so unique to this medium. But back to business, now it's time to remove the masking fluid, and I have a few ways to get it off. The one that's easiest but takes longer involves your eraser, and when you use soft erasers like I do, you'll spend half of it before your masking fluid is gone. You can also do that with your finger, or I use the sticky end of masking tape sometimes, but that actually caused a paper disruption in the whiskers area, so I'd stick with the eraser. Last part involves the cleanup and painting in the details. I love to use this paper, and that's the Canson Moulin du Roi cold pressed. It allows for lifting of the paint a lot, and that's how I clean up the mistakes quite often. I use a damp brush for this and rub the paint with it where I wanna lighten something or smoothen an edge. On the other hand, this paper allows for layering too, but it needs to be done with softer brushes, I found, so that you won't accidentally leave the paint when you don't want to. If you paint on arches paper, you won't be able to lift a lot of paint, and that's just how different watercolor papers are. Even if they have the same surface, weight, and the material they're made of, it's just different processes that these manufacturers use for making the paper, and so they will have some things in common, but you can't expect all techniques to work on all kinds of papers. At least that's my observation. This part of drawing in the darkest darks in the eyes and face features is pretty straightforward. It was probably the easiest part of the entire process. There is not much to mess, even with watercolor. You are using a tiny brush with very little water, so the paint doesn't really run everywhere, doesn't flow much, and you have things under control. And lastly, I decided to add white gouache after all and clean up some messy areas. Masking fluid can sometimes create very uneven line, and so I was fixing that mostly around the whiskers and some parts of the fur, but also I fixed a larger area on the tail that needed to unify, and gouache can be a great help in these scenarios. So that's my story of painting a white cat. Now you know all the secrets. Actually, patrons know all the secrets, and for their continuous financial support, I want to thank them so much, because that's how I'm currently able to prepare several art supply reviews for you on this channel. Also, please don't get me wrong, I'm so thankful to you for watching this video until its very end. It was made for you and only for you, with all my heart. And that's despite of the fact that I am still in my studio and my baby is waiting for me at home, so I will have to go now. I will see you in a few days. Bye!